G'day guys, it's Tom here from Showbag Streaming, and today I'm going to walk you through the step-by-step process to create a follow button that looks a little bit something like this, which you can use on your stream to remind your viewers to go ahead and hit that follow button. But before we begin, just remind you that I do stream on Twitch regularly, and if you could go head over there and follow me, that would be greatly appreciated. Alright, let's get into it. So the first thing that we need is a little bit of reference. So I've just selected a random streamer on twitch.tv, DMP3, playing a little bit of Among Us, just so that we can have a look at what happens to the follow button. So here we have its idle state, which is an empty heart and a neutral purple colour. We can see if we hover over, we get the hand symbol, a filled in heart that has grown slightly, and the follow button background has lightened itself somewhat. And then if I click on the follow button, it turns grey, and then after about half a second, it'll collapse to be just the love heart under the grey. So what I've gone ahead and done is I've taken screenshots of those three actions and I've put them into Photoshop. So we can see the neutral state, the hovered state, and what's happened after you have followed. This is going to help us in After Effects so that we can use them as a reference. The other thing that I've done is I've gone and created a heart shape. Now the heart shape has two layers. One is the heart filled and one is the heart normal stroke. They're both exactly the same layer shape. They both have the stroke on them, but you'll see that this one has the fill at 100% and this one has the fill at 0. If you don't know how to create this, don't worry, all these files are going to be in the description below. I've also gone ahead and created a hand shape. Again, this was done pretty quickly. I just got a low res image of the hand, drew it out with the shape tool and added a stroke. So again, this will be in the description below, but otherwise you shouldn't have too hard a time creating one yourself. So let's now jump into After Effects. What I want to do is I want to import some footage or some files. First one I'm going to import is the heart, and it's really important that I click editable layer styles so that we get both of the layers of the heart comp, the heart stroke, and the heart filled. I then want to import my hand and my reference image and import them both. The reason that I did it in that order is that if you import it all at once, you won't get the two different layers in the heart composition. So now that I have the files that I need, I'm going to create a new comp. 500 by 500 works really well for a nice big button that pops up on your stream, but also keeps the file sizes reasonably small. I stream at 60 FPS, so that's the frame rate that I'm using, and it's going to be a 4-second video. Like I said, we're going to use the HTML at the end to make sure that we don't have to have a whole bunch of empty space to create that interval, because you don't want it popping up every 4 seconds. Hit OK for the new comp, and here we are, 500 by 500. First thing I'm going to do is drag in my reference, and I'm going to scale it up so that it's the size of the button that I would like. I'm then going to create a new shape layer, and with the rounded rectangle tool and the fill being white, and we'll discuss why later, I'm going to click and drag. Now you can see I've already had a crack at doing this so that the edge radius is about the same as the reference follow button, but if it's not, you can just use the mouse wheel to either increase or decrease that edge radius, corner radius for the rounded rectangle. Something like that looks reasonably good. We'll just move it so that it is about the right size. Then what I want to do is I want to select those two, right click and pre-compose. I'm going to move all the attributes into the new composition, and I'm going to call this button. Now if I enter that comp, I've got my shape layer and my reference, and to the shape layer I want to add an effect, and it's going to be change to color. I'm going to select that on the shape layer 1, and I'm going to turn it off. You can see up here with the change to color I've got from white to white, but if I select the eyedropper here, change the color to that purple, and make sure you change hue, lightness and saturation, you can see that if I get my button shape back up, it is now the color of that idle follow button. Next thing that we need to complete, if I turn that off, is a bit of text. So follow, scale up and down with the size as required. So just try different sizes. I think for me today about 65 is going to work, as well as the VA, or the distance between each of the characters. If I move it on top there, you can see that that looks reasonably good. Potentially grab the text tool there again and just bring it in ever so slightly. That's looking pretty good to me. I'm using Arial and Bold, which is the font that the button uses. And the last thing that I want to add is my love heart shape. Now the one that I've created isn't necessarily exactly correct, but it still looks the part. So again, going back to project, grabbing my heart comp, dragging it in and resizing it, holding the shift button, resizing it to just be the size of the one that's the outline. If I then double click on that heart comp, I can set the transform opacity all the way down of the heart filled, so that when I go back to my normal comp, you can see that it's looking pretty good. Alright, so there's my button comp. I can go ahead and turn off my reference for the moment, because we'll be using that a bit later on. By the way, you can see I've got a black background here. I like working against black, but that's obviously not the background of the actual composition. That is transparent, which is going to work well for us to overlay on our stream. If I go back to comp 1, which is the main comp, the next thing that I want to do is to create a mask that's going to block the button as it comes up from below, so that it sort of pops out of thin air. The way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to go Layer, New, Shape Layer, and I'm going to select a rectangle there. I'm then going to click and drag till just below the position that the button is in. Doesn't matter left or right. And then with the button, you can see here I've got TRK, or Track Matte. I'm going to select Alpha Matte of Shape Layer 1. And you can see that now Shape Layer 1 isn't displaying, but if I was to move my button down below, it's using that as a track matte or a mask. If you can't see that track matte there, right click here, Columns and Modes. So if I turn that off, it gets rid of the track matte and the modes, put that back on, there you go. I can see the alpha of the shape layer above. Cool, so now you can see in very few steps we've got a follow button that looks pretty good, and let's add some animation, which is really what makes this pop. So the first thing that I'm going to do is here in the button transform, I'm going to select a stopwatch keyframe for position. I'm then going to go to 30 frames in and hit the keyframe button again. That's because this is where I want the button to end up. I'll then go back to my 0 frame, click, drag and hold shift to be straight down until it's out of view. And if we preview that, you can see it just pops up and comes out of nowhere. So that's reasonable in itself, but to really add a visual impact, we want to get some more dynamic animation happening. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to click on these two keyframes, right click, Keyframe Assistant and Easy Ease. And basically what that does is it slows the start, accelerates and then slows the end. So even with that simple Easy Ease, you can see it's a more dynamic animation. However, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go into the graph editor and see if we can make that look a little bit better. Before we do that, I'm going to right click here on the position and separate the dimensions, so that now we head into the graph editor. You can see that if I hit X position, it's just a straight red line because it's not moving left or right at all, and Y position, we've got an S shape. It's not particularly exaggerated in this one. But if we click on either of the keyframes, we can adjust the Bezier curve. Graph Editor is not something to be scared of. I know a lot of people are hesitant to use it when they're first starting out, but it's actually pretty easy to understand. So to start with, I'm going to pull this one out to the right to make a curve that drops down, and you can see that it's going to go quite slow and then accelerate. And then with this Bezier curve, I'm actually going to drag it slightly below. And what that's going to do is that as it comes up, it's going to go past the position that we want it to be in and bounce itself back down. Okay, and it just creates that little dynamic bounce at the end. So now if we play that animation back, you can see it pops up quite quickly, accelerates, and then slows itself down with a little bump at the end. And I think that just creates a real nice visual impact as it pops up on your screen. Cool. The next thing that I'm going to do is drag in my hand. I'm going to scale this down, again holding Shift. To something, again it doesn't need to be 100% accurate, that looks reasonably good to the eye. So very obvious that that's the hand clicking on the follow button. I'm going to do a very similar thing so that it's going to start its transform at 30 seconds after the button has popped in. Hit the stopwatch icon, move to 1 second and 30 frames, or 1.5 seconds, and click on the position again. We'll now go back, drag this one down to the bottom, holding Shift so that it goes straight, and in the same way that we did before, right click on those two, Keyframe Assistant Easy Ease, into the Graph Editor. Remember to separate these dimensions, just selecting the Y position and creating a Bezier curve very similar to the one that we used for the button, again with that little bit of a bump at the end. So if we play this back, comes up and then back down. So let's see the animation that we've got so far. Button comes up comes the hand over the top. A little bit slower. Again, you can adjust any of this to really get the visual impact that you're looking for. Out of the Graph Editor now, and we're going to have a look at creating the click animation. Now, this doesn't actually happen when you click in Windows, but we want to make it obvious what is happening in the animation. So, I'm going to move here to 2 seconds and create a scale keyframe by selecting the stopwatch icon, and there's a keyframe. I'm going to move 2 frames to the right, and I'm going to scale down ever so slightly, probably not that much, maybe to 20.5, and then 2 more frames, 1, 2, I'll go back to 22.5. So if we just play that little bit, just a very quick little boom, and it's such a small little animation that we probably don't need to add a Bezier curve to that one. Moving back now to 3 seconds, creating another keyframe for both the X and the Y position, and animating the hand back out of shot. Again, that's going to be over 30 seconds now. It's going to be away a little bit quicker. Click, holding Shift, and drag back down. Selecting these 2 keyframes of the Y position, right clicking, Easy Ease, should already be there, but I always tend to do it, back into the Graph Editor, and adjusting it to look something like that. Actually, what I've done is incorrect, because I've changed that line there, which will mean it will move over time. I want to make sure I've got that one selected and holding Shift to make sure that I don't move it up or down. Something like that. So if we now head back to the start of the animation, we should see the button pop up, the hand pop up, click, and then pop back down. Up, click, and then out of shot. Something I tend to do at the end, but we can mention it now, is to turn on motion blur. It just makes the whole thing look a whole lot smoother. So if we select this checkbox here for both the hand, the shape layer, and the button, and then make sure that it's enabled motion blur here, we can see that as it loads it, just adds that nice motion blur, especially with the quicker movements. It does slow down your load times, however, so as long as you don't forget towards the end, you can turn it off now. Sweet. Next thing that we're going to do is we're going to animate the change in color as the hand comes over the follow button. So the first frame that happens is this frame here. So I'm going to select that frame there and head into my button comp. So with that same frame selected, I'm going to go to the shape layer, effects, and change to color. And I'm going to change the 2 with a keyframe by selecting the stopwatch icon. I'm then going to move 4 frames forward, 3, 4, and I'm going to change the color that's selected to. So I'm going to get my reference back up here so I can see, grab the eyedropper, and that's the one that it's going to move to. So you can see that over those 4 frames, it smoothly fades to our highlighted color. Alright, so that's looking really, really good. The next thing that happens when we mouse over is that our heart goes from just being the stroke outline to actually filling in. So moving back to this frame, which is where the mouse starts moving over the follow button, we're going to enter our heart comp and select the opacity of this heart filled to create a keyframe by using the stopwatch button. So we're then going to move forward 1, 2, 3, 4 frames and set the opacity up to 100%. If we then head back into our button comp, you can see that over those 4 frames, it fills in. And the last thing that it does is it actually scales up slightly. So there's the frame where the hand goes over. So if we go to the reference image, we'll turn off our shape layer and we'll move the follow and create the heart scale keyframe by using the stopwatch. 1, 2, 3, and 4 frames, and we can scale it up slightly so that it's got the outline. You can make this as exaggerated as you'd like, but I find that works pretty well. So if we now turn off our reference, turn back on the shape layer and go into our main comp, we can see what it's starting to look like. Up comes a button, up comes a hand, and as it mouses over, the color changes and the heart increases. Alright, so now that we have the button popping up and the mouse over working, let's see what happens when the click occurs. So mouse comes up, over the top we come, and then we've got 4 frames from 2 seconds, of the click. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select the frame where the mouse hand is the smallest, which is 1, 2 frames in, and I'm going to head back into the button comp with that frame selected. We're going to once again, in this shape layer, animate the color. If we move forward 4 frames, 1, 2, 3, 4, and turn on our reference, we can again pick the eyedropper up to get to the grey. So as we click, it goes to grey, and as we saw in the reference, it takes a little bit of a pause and then it will collapse itself to the normal size. So going to the shape layer, I'm going to have a pause of 4 frames, head to the transform, contents, rectangle, rectangle path and size. I'm going to unlock that and create a keyframe by selecting the stopwatch. I'm going to move forward 1, 2, 3, 4 and change the horizontal size to match our reference. And if I grab my reference image there and move it up to the middle, just looking for the width here, create something like that. Select those two, back to the Easy Ease, into the graph editor. You can see we've got two sizes. We've got the one that doesn't change and the one that does. And just adjusting the size change. And if we move into those frames a little bit, you can see it's got that nice slow increase, quick acceleration, and then an ease out. Cool. I think that's happening a little bit too quickly. So what I'm going to do is head back here and drag this one out a couple more frames. So it's now happening over 6 frames. And even that's a bit quick. Let's drag it out a couple more. And that's looking really good. So we'll turn off this reference one, have a look at how that looks. Very nice. So that's working really well. Obviously, the next steps are to move the heart as well as get rid of the follow text. So let's fade out the text over time. So if we look at the follow layer, transform, and opacity, this is when it starts moving at this frame here. So let's get the opacity 100%, and by the time it gets here, it should be 0. Cool, that's a linear one. So again, selecting keyframes, Easy Ease into the graph, dragging it out so that it goes at the same rate, with roughly the same. It happens nice and quick. And then similarly, when we get ourselves to the heart, transform position, this is where it starts, stopwatch to create a keyframe. That's where it finishes. We can click and drag to make that the center of the composition. Selecting those two, keyframe assistant, Easy Ease, same thing we've seen before. We'll separate these dimensions. We want to, this time, just do the X, and you see that all collapses really nicely. So if we look back at our main comp, we can see the progress that we've made. Up it pops, up the mouse goes, click, and back down. The last thing that we need to do is scale out the button. That's really quite easy to do. So I'm going to move to about here and start scaling it out. Okay, so let's go to the button, scale, again selecting the icon to create a keyframe, and I'm going to move it to 30 frames, scale it to 0, select those two keyframes like we've been doing this whole time, Easy Ease. Now there are different plugins that you can get that will allow you to add Easy Eases like this very easily, pardon the pun. However, I find doing it yourself gives you more control over the graph if you want some different animations, because you can get okay animations pretty quickly with the plugins. However, if you want something that's really specifically what you want, getting your head around the graph editor is really, really good too. And there we have it. We have our finished button from start to finish. Click and back down and out. And that'll loop over and over like that. Okay, so the last thing that we want to do is make sure that motion blur is enabled. If I go into the button, making sure that these layers also have motion blur enabled, so that our final render is going to look nice and smooth with the motion blur enabled. You can see on the edge of the rectangle there. And that's just the button itself. If we go to the main comp, see, it looks really, really nice. Sweet. So what we're going to do now is export that. So I'm going to add it to a render queue, and the output module, I'm going to select QuickTime. It's important that we select RGB plus alpha, and I use the animation codec. It seems to work really well, and I use this for pretty much all of my overlays because it seems to transfer to WebM really well, which is what we're going to be using a bit later on. So hit OK. No audio in this, and then we'll output it to follow button and hit render, and it's rendered for us. Now let's head into OBS, and because I'm actually using OBS to record this video, I've got the infinite display of death, but we can add a new source. If we select a media source, create this as follow video, browse, and we've got the follow button. You can see that it'll pop up, but there'll be no delay. It'll continually pop up. If I hit loop on the properties, it'll just continually loop, which actually creates quite a cool effect as it pops up, goes down, and runs over and over. But that's obviously not what we want. We want it to pop up once every few minutes to remind people to hit that follow button. So to do that, we're going to take our MOV file and head into Chrome so that we can convert it. So in Chrome now, I just use an online video converter, aconvert.com, and select video or /video there. Choose the file that we want to convert, which is followbutton.mov. Select the target format and hit convert now. Alright, so that's finished converting. So now I can download that file. And we'll save it as follow button web. That's downloaded. Okay, next we're going to create the very simple HTML file that's going to be the interval timer for this video. I've created the script here. It's going to be in the description below, but just a quick sort of heads up on what's going on. In the head here we have the refresh function happening at every 5 seconds. So this is the number here that we change to change the interval. If you want to do it every 2 minutes, this number would be 120. If you want to do it every 4 minutes, obviously 240. And down here is the video source, and up here if we go preload autoplay, and then muted, and I found muted is required for WebM files. If you do have a file that has sound in it, you can get around this by just exporting it to MP4 in the previous step. So if we have a look at this now, and we'll change the refresh to 10 seconds and go ahead and save that file, and I've just saved it as all files follow_page.html. Back into OBS now. If we add a new browser source, we can call this follow browser. Click local file, browse to the follow page that we've just created, and we can set it to 500 by 500, which is what we know the video file is. If we look now, follow button pops up, comes down, and then there is a delay. and that delay is up to you by changing the HTML file. And back down. Alright, that's it from me. I hope you enjoyed that walkthrough, and like I said earlier, all the files that you saw today will be in the description below. If you did enjoy yourself, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button and be notified every time I upload a new video. Thanks for watching.